The soft morning sun bathed the little village in gold as birds chirped joyously, their songs weaving through the cool air. At the heart of the village stood a modest house, its walls worn but sturdy, much like the boy who lived inside. Ariv, a bright-eyed 15-year-old, had spent most of his life here, helping his father at their small repair shop. Though their home lacked luxuries, his parents had always tried to provide what they could, a simple life filled with love, laughter, and occasional struggles. But lately, something had shifted inside Ariv. He often found himself lost in thought, staring at the distant mountains as if they held the answers to questions he couldn't yet articulate. What's the point of all this? He would wonder. Does my life really matter in the grand scheme of things? His father, Ravi, had noticed the change. Ariv had grown quieter, his once vibrant energy dimmed by an invisible weight. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ravi called Ariv over. The two sat on the worn steps of their home, the twilight casting long shadows. Ravi had a way of speaking that always made people listen, not because he was loud, but because his words carried the weight of experience. Ariv, Ravi began, his voice calm yet firm, I see the questions in your eyes, son. Life seems confusing sometimes, doesn't it? Ariv nodded hesitantly, unsure of how to explain the knot of emotions inside him. Instead of lecturing, Ravi reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unremarkable stone. It was gray, rough around the edges, and seemed utterly ordinary. Ariv frowned, confused by what his father was doing. This, Ravi said, holding the stone up to catch the fading light, is going to teach you something valuable. Tomorrow, I want you to take this to the market. But listen carefully. Don't sell it. Just show it to people and see what they're willing to offer for it. Don't say a word, just hold it out, and if someone asks the price, hold up 2 fingers like this. Ravi demonstrated, raising 2 fingers into the air. Ariv was baffled. But it's just a rock, he said, staring at the stone. Ravi smiled knowingly. Just do as I say, and you'll understand. There's a lesson in this stone, Ariv. One that might help you see your life a little differently. The next morning, Ariv set off for the bustling marketplace, the stone tucked carefully in his pocket. The streets were alive with energy, vendors shouting to advertise their wares, children weaving through the crowds, and the aroma of freshly baked bread filling the air. Nervously, Ariv approached the first vendor, an elderly fruit seller with kind eyes. He held out the stone, unsure of what to expect. The fruit seller squinted at it, then chuckled. That's an odd thing to carry around, boy. I suppose I could use it as a paperweight. How about 2 rupees? Ariv hesitated, remembering his father's instructions. He simply held up 2 fingers and moved on. As the day went on, Ariv showed the stone to a jeweler, a carpenter, and even a street performer. Each person saw the stone differently. The jeweler examined it under a magnifying glass, muttering about its texture and possible origins. It might have some value, the jeweler said. How about I give you 200 rupees for it? Ariv's eyes widened, but he didn't sell it. By the time he returned home that evening, Ariv was exhausted and even more confused. What's so special about this stone, Papa? He asked as he handed it back to his father. One person saw it as a paperweight, another thought it was worth 200 rupees. Everyone had a different opinion, but it's just a rock. Ravi smiled, but instead of answering, he said, Tomorrow, take it to the gemstone shop at the edge of the city. Show it to the owner. But again, don't sell it. Ariv groaned inwardly, but agreed. The next day, he made the long journey to the gemstone shop. It was a small, dimly lit space filled with sparkling treasures. The shop owner, a meticulous man with a sharp eye, took one look at the stone and gasped. Where did you get this? He asked, his voice tinged with excitement. It's not for sale, Ariv replied, following his father's instructions. The man smiled. Not for sale? Well, if it were, I'd pay you 20,000 rupees for it. This is no ordinary stone. It's a rare gemstone, one that's incredibly valuable. Ariv was speechless. He returned home that evening, his mind racing. Papa, he said as soon as he walked through the door, the man at the gemstone shop said it's worth 20,000 rupees. How is that possible? It looked like an ordinary rock to me. Ravi's expression softened, and he placed a hand on Ariv's shoulder. And that, my son, is the lesson I wanted you to learn. The value of this stone didn't change. It was always the same. But its worth depended on who was looking at it and how much they understood its true potential. The same is true for you. People may judge you differently, but your true value comes from knowing your own worth, no matter what others see or say. Ariv stared at his father, the words sinking in slowly but deeply. For the first time in weeks, the knot in his chest began to loosen. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he felt like he was starting to understand something important. Just as Ravi was about to say more, the sound of a loud knock echoed through the house, cutting through their conversation. Ariv turned toward the door, his heart suddenly racing. Who could it be at this hour? The knock at the door echoed again, louder this time, filling the quiet house with a sense of urgency. Ariv's father stood, motioning for him to stay put, but Ariv was too curious to sit still. He followed closely behind as Ravi unlatched the wooden door. Standing on the doorstep was an old man, cloaked in a long, faded shawl that seemed to carry the dust of countless journeys. His weathered face was creased with lines that spoke of wisdom and hardship, and his eyes, sharp and penetrating, seemed to look right through Ariv, as if reading his thoughts. In his hands, he clutched a small cloth bag that appeared heavy despite its size. Ravi, the old man said, his voice steady but low, it's been a long time. Ravi stiffened, his face momentarily unreadable. He glanced at Ariv before stepping outside and closing the door slightly behind him, though not all the way. Ariv stood frozen, his curiosity burning like a fire inside him. Through the crack in the door, he could hear muffled whispers, the old man's voice mingling with his father's in a tone that was both familiar and serious. Ariv had never seen this man before, but there was something about him that felt out of place. Who was he? And what could he possibly want from their humble home? Moments later, Ravi re-entered the house, his face set with a strange mix of relief and concern. He didn't say a word about the old man, nor did he acknowledge Ariv's questioning gaze. Instead, he motioned for Ariv to sit at the table. "Papa, who is that?" Ariv finally asked, unable to contain himself. Ravi hesitated, his hand gripping the back of the chair tightly. "An old acquaintance," he replied, his tone neutral but guarded. "Nothing for you to worry about." But Ariv couldn't let it go. Something about the man's arrival felt significant, even if he couldn't explain why. That night, as the house settled into silence, Ariv lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The words his father had spoken earlier about the stone replayed in his mind, weaving themselves into the mystery of the old man. Did the two somehow connect? The next day, Ravi surprised Ariv with an unexpected task. "Ariv, I need you to take this package to the edge of the village," he said, placing a small wooden box in Ariv's hands. It was light, but securely tied with thick twine. "Who's it for?" Ariv asked, eyeing the box curiously. "Just follow the path past the fields," Ravi instructed, avoiding the question. "You'll know where to go when you get there." Though confused, Ariv didn't argue. He set off on foot, the sun climbing higher in the sky as he walked past rows of swaying crops and small clusters of grazing goats. The wooden box felt oddly warm in his hands, though he couldn't tell if it was from the sun or something else. The path wound further than Ariv had expected, eventually leading him to a clearing near the base of the mountain. There, a small hut stood, its walls patched with bits of scrap wood and cloth. Smoke curled lazily from a crooked chimney, and outside sat the old man from the previous night, stirring a pot over an open fire. Ariv approached cautiously, the crunch of his footsteps drawing the man's attention. The old man looked up and smiled faintly, as if he had been expecting him. "Ah, the boy with the stone," he said, his voice calm and steady. Ariv froze. How did the man know about the stone? He hadn't told anyone outside his family. How do you know about that?" Ariv stammered. The old man chuckled softly, his gaze never leaving Ariv. "Some things in life have a way of revealing themselves," he said cryptically. "Come, sit." Though hesitant, Ariv obeyed, setting the wooden box down beside him. The old man studied him closely, his sharp eyes glinting in the sunlight. Do you know why your father sent you here? No, Arav admitted. He just told me to bring this. The old man nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes answers aren't given. They're discovered. He reached for the box, untying the twine with a slow, deliberate motion. Inside was something that made Arav's breath catch, a small, perfectly cut gemstone, its deep blue hue shimmering like the ocean at sunrise. It looked nothing like the rough stone Arav had carried to the market. Yet somehow it felt connected. This stone, the old man began, holding it up to catch the light, is much like the one you showed at the marketplace. It began as something ordinary, rough, unpolished, overlooked. But with time, care, and the right hands, it became something extraordinary. Arav leaned forward, captivated. Is that what my father wanted me to see? That things can change. The old man shook his head slowly. Not just things, boy. People. You see, life has a way of testing us. It chips away at our rough edges, sometimes painfully, to reveal who we truly are. But only if we're willing to see our own value. Even when others don't. Arav felt a strange mix of emotions, curiosity, unease, and a growing sense of understanding. But how do you know if you're valuable? If you matter, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The old man's gaze softened. That's a question you must answer for yourself. But let me ask you this. Why did some people at the market see your stone as worthless, while others saw it as valuable? Arav thought for a moment, remembering the jeweler and the gemstone shop owner. Because they understood what it really was, he said slowly. Exactly, the old man said, his voice firm. And that's the key. Not everyone will see your worth, Arav. Not everyone will understand who you are or what you can become. But that doesn't change your value. It's up to you to decide how much you're worth and to surround yourself with those who can see it too. Before Arav could respond, the old man placed the gemstone back in the box and handed it to him. Take this back to your father. He'll know what to do with it. Arav took the box, his mind swirling with questions he couldn't yet articulate. As he walked back home, the weight of the old man's words settled over him like a blanket. He didn't have all the answers, but something inside him felt different, stronger, clearer, more certain. When he arrived home, Ravi was waiting, his expression unreadable. Arav handed him the box, and Ravi opened it, his eyes softening as he looked at the gemstone. Did he say anything to you? Ravi asked quietly. Yes, Arav replied, his voice steady. He said that life tests us to reveal who we are, and that not everyone will see our worth, but we have to know it for ourselves. Ravi smiled faintly, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. Good. Then you've begun to understand. Arav wanted to ask more, to press his father for answers about the old man, the stone, and what it all meant. But before he could, a faint knock sounded at the door once again. This time, Arav didn't hesitate. He moved toward the door, his heart pounding with both fear and anticipation as he reached for the latch. What lay beyond it, he couldn't say. But something deep inside him whispered that whatever was coming next would change everything. Arav hesitated for just a moment before opening the door. The weight of everything he'd experienced over the past 2 days hung heavy in his mind, and as the door creaked open, his breath caught. Standing there wasn't the old man, as he'd half expected, but a woman. She was tall, with sharp features and piercing eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the home with one sweep. Her presence was commanding, her dark shawl draped over her shoulders like a cloak of authority. She carried no smile, only an air of quiet intensity. Is Ravi home? She asked, her voice calm but laced with something Arav couldn't quite place. Urgency, maybe? Or was it something deeper? Arav stepped aside, unsure whether to invite her in. But before he could say anything, his father appeared behind him. Ravi's face changed the moment he saw her. His usual calm expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. Mira, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here? Mira's gaze didn't waver. You know why I'm here, she replied simply. Arav glanced between them, his confusion growing with every passing second. Who was this woman? And how did she know his father? Ravi sighed heavily and gestured for her to come inside. Without hesitation, Mira stepped in, her presence filling the small room as if she belonged there. Arav stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of what to do or say. His father noticed and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Arav," he said gently, "go outside for a bit. I need to speak with Mira alone." "But, Papa," Arav started to protest, his frustration bubbling up. He had been kept in the dark for too long, and he was tired of not knowing what was going on. "Please," Ravi said, his tone firmer now. "I'll explain everything later." Reluctantly, Arav stepped outside, but he didn't go far. Instead, he lingered near the window, straining to catch snippets of their conversation. Their voices were low, but every now and then, he could make out a few words. "He's getting closer," Mira was saying. "You don't have much time." Ravi's reply was muffled, but Arav heard enough to sense the tension in his voice. "I'm trying to protect him," his father said. "He doesn't need to be dragged into this." "This isn't about what he needs, Ravi," Mira shot back. "It's about what's coming. You can't shield him forever." Arav's heart raced.
Who were they talking about?
And what was coming? He leaned closer to the window, desperate to hear more, but their voices dropped further, their words now impossible to decipher. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened, and Mira stepped out. She glanced at Arav, her expression softening just slightly. "Take care, boy," she said quietly before disappearing down the path. Arav waited until she was out of sight before rushing back inside. His father was sitting at the table, his head in his hands. He looked up when Arav entered, his face lined with worry. "Papa," Arav said, his voice trembling with frustration and fear, "what's going on? Who was that woman? And what did she mean about something getting closer?" Ravi sighed, running a hand through his hair. He seemed to be searching for the right words, but when he finally spoke, his tone was heavy. "Arav, there are things I've kept from you, things I hoped you would never have to know. But it seems I can't keep them hidden any longer." Arav's heart pounded. He sat down across from his father, bracing himself for whatever was about to come. "The stone I gave you," Ravi began, "wasn't just a test. It's part of something much bigger. Something dangerous." He paused, as if weighing how much to reveal. "Years ago, before you were born, I was involved in something, a group, you could say. We dealt with rare and valuable artifacts, some of which had unusual properties." Arav stared at him, wide-eyed. "What kind of properties?" "Some could heal, others could harm," Ravi said. "And some, like the stone you carried, held secrets that people would do anything to uncover. The gemstone you saw at the old man's hut, it's connected to that same stone. Together, they're part of a larger piece, one that could change everything if it falls into the wrong hands." Arav's mind raced. "So, why did you give it to me? Why involve me at all?" "Because you needed to understand," Ravi said firmly. "You needed to see that not everything is as it seems. The world is full of people who will try to determine your worth based on what they see on the surface. But sometimes, what's hidden beneath is far more important." Arav sat back, trying to process everything. The stone, the old man, Mira's warning, it was all connected, but the full picture was still blurry. "And who's getting closer?" he asked. Ravi's face darkened. "Someone I hoped we'd never have to deal with again. He's been searching for the pieces of this artifact for years, and if he finds them," he trailed off, his jaw tightening. "What happens if he finds them?" Arav pressed. Ravi met his eyes, his voice low but steady. "Then he'll have the power to control people, entire nations, even. He'll be able to manipulate what people see, what they believe, and what they value. It's a power no one should have." Arav felt a chill run down his spine. The idea of someone wielding that kind of influence was terrifying. But one question lingered in his mind, gnawing at him. "Why us, Papa? Why is this our problem?" "Because I was foolish enough to be part of it in the first place," Ravi admitted, his voice filled with regret. "And now, it's my responsibility to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Before Arav could ask more, there was another knock at the door. Sharp and urgent this time. Ravi's face tensed, and he motioned for Arav to stay back. But Arif couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was on the other side of that door was bringing them closer to the danger his father had been trying so hard to avoid. As Ravi reached for the latch, Arif's heart pounded in his chest, the suspense unbearable. Everything in his life was shifting, and he couldn't shake the feeling that opening the door would be the point of no return. The latch clicked, the door creaked open, and Arif held his breath, bracing himself for what, or who, was waiting on the other side. The door opened slowly, the light from outside spilling into the room. Arif held his breath, his eyes darting to his father's face, which had gone pale. Standing in the doorway was a tall man with a face that seemed carved from stone. His sharp cheekbones and piercing eyes gave him an air of authority, but there was something about him that felt cold, dangerous. "Ravi," the man said, his voice smooth but chilling. "It's been a long time." Ravi stepped forward, his body tense, shielding Arif from view. "What do you want, Dev?" The man, Dev, smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I think you already know. Let's not waste time pretending otherwise." Arif tried to stay hidden behind his father, but his curiosity was too strong. He peered around Ravi's arm, and Dev's gaze locked onto him instantly. The faint smile on his face widened, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind that sent a shiver down Arif's spine. "So, this is the boy," Dev said, his tone almost amused. "You've brought him into this, haven't you? I expected better from you, Ravi." Ravi straightened, his voice firm. "Leave him out of this. He doesn't know anything." Dev chuckled softly, stepping inside, as if he owned the place. Ravi didn't stop him, though every muscle in his body seemed ready to spring into action. Dev's presence filled the room, his every move deliberate and calculated. He glanced around, his eyes lingering on the table where the wooden box had been earlier. "Where is it?" Dev asked, his voice quiet but commanding. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ravi replied evenly, though Arif could hear the strain in his voice. Dev's eyes narrowed, and the tension in the room grew thick enough to cut with a knife. "Don't lie to me, Ravi. We both know how this works. You have the piece, and I intend to take it." Arif's heart raced as he realized what Dev was talking about. The stone, the gemstone his father had sent to the old man. Was that what this was all about? Arif's mind swirled with questions, but he stayed silent, sensing the danger in the air. Ravi took a step closer to Dev, his voice low and steady. "You'll never find it, and even if you did, you wouldn't know how to use it." Dev's expression darkened, and for a moment, Arif thought he might strike Ravi right then and there. But instead, Dev leaned back, his smile returning, though it was colder this time. "You think you can protect him," Dev said, nodding toward Arif. "But you're wrong. The boy's already involved, whether you like it or not. And if you don't give me what I want, I'll make sure he suffers for your mistakes." Ravi's fists clenched at his sides, and Arif could see the rage bubbling just beneath the surface. But his father didn't rise to the provocation. Instead, he took a deep breath and spoke calmly. "If you harm him, you'll never get what you're after. You know that." Dev tilted his head, as if considering Ravi's words. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the house, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. At the door, he paused and glanced back. "You have until sunset," he said. "If you don't hand it over by then, I won't be so patient next time." With that, he disappeared into the fading light, leaving Ravi and Arif standing in the heavy silence. "Papa," Arif whispered, his voice trembling, "what does he want? Why does he think we have it?" Ravi turned to him, his face etched with worry. "Because he knows we're the only ones who can stop him. He's been hunting these pieces for years, trying to assemble them into a whole. If he succeeds," Ravi trailed off, shaking his head. "It's too dangerous to let him." Arif swallowed hard, the weight of his father's words sinking in. "But why us? Can't we just give it to someone else, someone who can handle it?" Ravi placed a hand on Arif's shoulder, his grip firm but comforting. "No one else can, Arif. That's why I've been hiding it all these years. It's why I didn't want you involved. But now it's too late to keep you out of it." Before Arif could respond, there was a faint sound outside, a rustling in the bushes. Ravi's head snapped toward the window, his body tensing again. "Stay here," he whispered, moving toward the door. But Arav couldn't stay put. The fear and adrenaline coursing through him wouldn't let him sit still. He followed his father as quietly as he could, peeking out the window just as Ravi opened the door. Standing there was the old man from the hut. His expression was grim, and in his hands, he held the wooden box with the gemstone inside. "You're running out of time," the old man said, his voice steady but urgent. "Dev isn't bluffing. He'll tear this village apart if he thinks it'll lead him to the artifact." Ravi nodded, stepping aside to let the old man in. Arav watched as the two of them spoke in hushed tones, their faces grave. He wanted to ask what they were planning, but something about their intensity made him hesitate. Finally, Ravi turned to Arav, his expression serious. "Arav, you need to listen carefully. We don't have much time. The stone, this piece, is only one part of the artifact. Dev can't use it on its own, but he's already found some of the other pieces. If he gets this one..." Ravi didn't finish, but Arav understood. The stakes were higher than he'd realized, and the responsibility felt overwhelming. "What do we do?" Arav asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ravi exchanged a glance with the old man before replying. "We take it to the only place he can't reach. But it's not going to be easy, and it's going to require all of us." Arav nodded, his fear giving way to determination. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he couldn't back down now. Not when so much was at stake. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the room, Arav couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading straight into the storm, and that Dev would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. The room was quiet, but the silence felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Arav sat by the window, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the last slivers of sunlight disappeared, leaving the sky painted in hues of purple and deep orange. His father and the old man were still whispering near the table, their conversation too low for Arav to hear. He felt a knot tightening in his stomach, an anxious pull that something was about to go wrong. Finally, the old man stood, his weathered face looking even more tired under the dim light of the single lamp. He reached into the folds of his shawl and pulled out something Arav hadn't seen before, a second gemstone. This one was smaller, but its surface shimmered with a strange, otherworldly glow. "This is the decoy," the old man said, his voice low but firm. "It's not as powerful as the Real stone, but it'll confuse him long enough for you to get away." "Get away?" Arav blurted out before he could stop himself. "Where are we going? And why does he need to be confused if we're leaving?" Both men turned to look at him, their faces shadowed by the flickering light. Ravi sighed deeply and pulled a chair closer to his son. "Arav," he began, his tone soft but steady, "you need to understand that this isn't just about protecting the stone. It's about making sure Dev doesn't hurt anyone else in his pursuit of power." "But he said he'd come back by sunset," Arav protested. "If we just give him what he wants, won't he leave us alone?" "No," the old man interrupted, his voice sharp. "You can't negotiate with someone like Dev. He doesn't just want the stone, he wants the control it gives him. If you hand it over, it won't end here. It'll only get worse." Arav bit his lip, his mind racing. He wanted to believe his father and the old man, but a part of him wondered if they were underestimating Dev's determination. After all, Dev had already found them despite all the precautions Ravi had taken. What if there was no escaping him? Before Arav could voice his doubts, there was a loud knock at the door. 3 sharp raps that made the entire house feel like it was holding its breath. Ravi and the old man froze, their eyes locking for a brief moment before Ravi motioned for Arav to stay behind him. "Stay quiet," Ravi whispered, his voice barely audible. Arav's heart raced as Ravi approached the door, his movements cautious but purposeful. The knock came again, louder this time, and Arav thought he could hear faint whispers outside. His father opened the door just a crack, enough to see who was there but not enough to let anyone in. To Arav's shock, it wasn't Dev standing there. It was Mira. Her face was pale, and there was a wildness in her eyes that Arav hadn't seen earlier. She stepped inside quickly, glancing over her shoulder as if she expected to be followed. "You don't have much time," she said, her voice urgent. He's not waiting until sunset. He's already on his way.
What?
Ravi's voice was sharp now, his composure slipping.
How do you know that?
Mira's eyes darted to Arav, then back to Ravi. Because I was with him. He doesn't trust me anymore, but he's using me to keep tabs on you. I heard him talking to his men. They're planning to storm this house tonight. The old man cursed under his breath, pacing the room.
We need to leave now, he said.
If he finds us here, it's over. Wait, Arav said, standing up. Why are you helping us? If you're with him, why did you come here to warn us? Mira looked at him, her expression softening for just a moment. Because I owe your father, she said simply. And because I know what Dev is capable of. I don't want to see anyone else get hurt. Arav could sense there was more to her story, but there was no time to press her for details. Ravi was already grabbing a small bag from under the table, stuffing it with a few essentials and what looked like a map. The old man handed him the decoy gemstone, wrapping it carefully in cloth before placing it in the bag. What about the real stone? Arav asked, his voice trembling. Ravi hesitated, then glanced at the old man, who nodded grimly.
We're splitting up, Ravi said.
The decoy will stay with me. You and Mira will take the real stone and follow the map to a safe location.
What?
Arav's voice rose in panic. I'm not leaving you. We can face him together. Arav, Ravi said firmly, placing both hands on his son's shoulders. You have to trust me. This is the only way to keep the stone safe. If we all stay together, we're an easy target. But if we split up, we have a chance. Arav wanted to argue, but the look in his father's eyes stopped him. There was no time for second-guessing. He nodded reluctantly, and Ravi pulled him into a tight hug. Stay close to Mira, Ravi said. She'll protect you. And whatever happens, don't let anyone take the stone. The urgency in his father's voice sent a chill through Arav, but he nodded again, determined not to let his fear show. The group moved quickly, exiting through the back door just as the sound of voices carried through the night air. Dev and his men were close, too close. Arav could feel his heart pounding as he followed Mira into the shadows, the weight of the stone tucked securely in his pocket. As they disappeared into the darkness, Arav glanced back one last time, catching a glimpse of his father and the old man standing their ground. The sight filled him with a mix of dread and determination. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. They were far from safe, and the worst was yet to come. The forest was darker than Arav had imagined, the towering trees blocking out even the faintest sliver of moonlight. He stumbled over roots and uneven ground, his hand gripping the smooth, cold surface of the stone in his pocket. Mira moved ahead of him, her steps light and sure, as if she'd traveled this path 100 times before. The tension in the air was suffocating, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig making Arav's heart jump. They didn't speak as they moved deeper into the woods. Mira kept glancing over her shoulder, her expression a mix of determination and worry. Arav couldn't shake the image of his father standing in the doorway, the decoy stone in hand, ready to face Dev. He wanted to believe Ravi could handle it, but a gnawing fear crept into his mind. What if this was the last time he'd see his father? After what felt like hours, Mira stopped abruptly, holding up a hand to signal Arav to halt. She crouched low, peering through the thick underbrush. Arav squinted, trying to see what she was looking at, but all he could make out were shadows. They're here, Mira whispered, her voice barely audible. Arav's breath caught in his throat. Who? He whispered back, though he already knew the answer. Mira didn't reply. Instead, she pulled Arav down beside her, her eyes scanning the darkness. Arav strained his ears, and then he heard it, a low murmur of voices, growing louder as they approached. His grip tightened around the stone in his pocket. We need to keep moving, Mira said, her voice urgent but calm. But we have to be careful. If they see us... She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Arav nodded, his heart hammering as they crept forward, each step painfully slow. The voices grew louder, and Arav could make out snippets of conversation. Dev's men were close. Too close. Mira led him toward a large boulder, gesturing for him to crouch behind it. They waited in silence, the sound of footsteps and breaking branches echoing in the stillness. Ariv's mind raced. If Dev's men found them, it would be over. They'd take the stone, and everything his father had worked to protect would be lost. He glanced at Mira, who was scanning the area with sharp, calculating eyes. For a moment, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could outsmart Dev. But then, the unexpected happened. A figure stepped into view, and Ariv's heart sank. It wasn't one of Dev's men. It was his father. "Papa," Ariv whispered, starting to stand. But Mira grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. "Wait," she hissed. Ravi looked exhausted, his clothes torn and his face streaked with dirt. He was holding the decoy stone in one hand, his other hand resting on his hip, as if he were trying to catch his breath. Dev emerged from the shadows a moment later, his sharp features illuminated by the faint glow of a lantern one of his men carried. "You're persistent, Ravi," Dev said, his voice dripping with mockery. "But you should know by now you can't win. Hand it over, and maybe I'll let the boy go unharmed." Ravi's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "You'll never get the Real stone, Dev," he said, his voice steady despite the obvious danger. Dev's smile faltered for a moment, and Ariv noticed a flicker of anger in his eyes. "You're testing my patience," he said, his tone colder now. "Do you really think you can protect it forever?" Ravi didn't respond. Instead, he threw the decoy stone to the ground, shattering it into pieces. The men around Dev gasped, and for a moment, there was silence. Dev's expression darkened, his lips curling into a snarl. "You think this is a game?" he hissed. In that instant, Mira made her move. She grabbed Ariv's arm and pulled him to his feet, running in the opposite direction. Ariv's legs felt like jelly, but he forced himself to keep up, clutching the Real stone tightly. Behind them, he could hear the chaos erupting, Dev shouting, his men scrambling, Ravi yelling something Ariv couldn't make out. They ran until Ariv thought his lungs would give out, the cold night air stinging his throat. Finally, Mira pulled him into a small clearing and stopped. Ariv doubled over, gasping for breath. "We can't keep running," Ariv said between breaths. "He'll find us." Mira knelt beside him, her face grim. "Not if we finish this," she said. Ariv looked at her, confused. "Finish what?" Before she could answer, there was a rustling behind them. Ariv turned, his heart sinking as Dev stepped into the clearing, his eyes locked on the stone in Ariv's hand. "Give it to me," Dev said, his voice calm but menacing. Ariv froze, his mind racing. Mira stepped in front of him, her stance protective. "You'll have to go through me first," she said. Dev chuckled, taking a step closer. "Do you really think you can stop me?" And then, something unexpected happened. The stone in Ariv's hand began to glow, its light growing brighter and brighter until it filled the entire clearing. Dev stumbled back, shielding his eyes, and Ariv felt a surge of warmth coursing through him. The light grew so intense that Ariv had to close his eyes. When he opened them again, Dev was gone. The clearing was silent, the air still and heavy. Ariv looked down at the stone, its glow fading until it returned to its original dull sheen. "What just happened?" Ariv asked, his voice shaking. Mira smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with tears. "You made the right choice," she said. "The stone only responds to those with pure intentions." Dev was consumed by greed, and in the end, it destroyed him. Ariv stared at the stone, the weight of everything that had happened finally sinking in. He didn't feel victorious, only tired. But as the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, he felt a small glimmer of hope. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, he believed they had a chance. Ariv stood in the clearing, his fingers still clutching the stone as the morning light crept over the horizon. The weight of everything that had just happened settled in his chest, heavy but oddly calming. Mira, still catching her breath, walked up to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did well," she said softly, her voice filled with both relief and exhaustion. "It's over for now." Ariv looked at her, the tension in his face giving way to confusion. "But is it really over? What about my dad? And Dev, is he gone?" Mira hesitated, her eyes flickering to the ground as if she were searching for the right words. "Your father knew what he was doing," she said. "He wanted to protect you, Arav." As for Dev, the stone's light didn't just destroy him. It exposed what he truly was. Someone so consumed by greed and darkness can't survive against something so pure. Arav wanted to believe her, but part of him couldn't shake the lingering fear that Dev might return. He stared at the stone, its surface now dull and unassuming, as if all the energy it had unleashed had disappeared with the night. "We need to find my dad," Arav said firmly, determination replacing his doubt. Mira nodded. "We will. But first, we have to keep moving. The stone may have protected us from Dev, but its power will always attract those who seek it for the wrong reasons. It's not safe to stay in one place for too long." They began their journey back toward the village, the forest now bathed in soft morning light. The path that had seemed so terrifying under the cover of darkness now felt almost peaceful, though Arav couldn't shake the tension in his chest. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting Dev or his men to emerge from the shadows. When they finally reached the edge of the forest, Arav saw a familiar figure standing near the road. His heart leaped, and he broke into a run. "Papa," he called out, his voice cracking with emotion. Ravi turned, a mixture of relief and exhaustion on his face. He opened his arms, and Arav ran straight into them, burying his face in his father's chest. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of the night's events making words unnecessary. "I'm so glad you're safe," Ravi said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "I was so worried." "We're okay," Arav said, pulling back to look at his father's face. "But Dev, he's gone, Papa." "The stone." "I know," Ravi interrupted, his expression somber. "I felt it. The light, the power, it was like the forest itself came alive." "The stone chose you, Arav. You protected it when it mattered most." Arav wasn't sure how to respond. He still didn't fully understand what had happened or why the stone had reacted the way it did. All he knew was that it had worked and they were still standing. Mira joined them, her gaze scanning the horizon as if she were still on high alert. "We need to leave," she said, her tone practical but gentle. "Dev might be gone, but the danger isn't. There are others who'll come looking for the stone." Ravi nodded, his face set with resolve. "She's right. We can't stay here. But we'll find a safe place, Arav. Somewhere the stone can't be used for harm." As they began walking, Arav couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Relief that his father was safe, sadness for the life they were leaving behind, and a newfound sense of responsibility for the stone he carried. "What happens now?" Arav asked after a long stretch of silence. Ravi glanced at him, his expression thoughtful. "We keep moving," he said. "The stone isn't just an object, Arav. It's a reminder of the choices we make, the power we hold to protect what's right. As long as it's with us, we have a duty to use that power wisely." Arav nodded, the weight of his father's words sinking in. He thought back to the moment the stone had unleashed its light, the warmth and strength he'd felt in that instant. It wasn't just about the stone, it was about what it represented. Mira, walking slightly ahead, slowed her pace to match Arav's. "You're stronger than you realize," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "The stone saw that in you. And so do we." Arav didn't reply, but her words stayed with him as they continued their journey. The road stretched ahead, uncertain and full of challenges, but for the first time, he felt ready to face it. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Arav found himself thinking about the people they had left behind, the home that was no longer safe. He wondered if they'd ever be able to return, if there would come a day when the stone's power wouldn't be a burden. But for now, he focused on the path ahead, his father and Mira by his side. In the end, it wasn't just about the stone or the danger it attracted. It was about the choices they made to protect one another, to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. Arav didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for certain. They were stronger together, and as long as they had each other, they could face whatever came next. The journey wasn't over, but it was a new beginning. And with every step they took, Arav felt the weight of the stone in his pocket, a constant reminder of the value of life, the power of choices, and the strength that comes from standing up for what truly matters.